Welcome back to Made to Be Whole. This is Krista. This week we have my friend Carol Billich, co-founder of IntellxxDNA, here to share her story and give you more insight into everything that Intellx can do for you.
Made to be Whole is intended for informational purposes only. It's not intended to replace the advice or care of a licensed healthcare professional. Participating in this podcast does not constitute a provider-patient relationship with Krista Michener, AHP Integrative Health, or any of the guests featured on Made to Be Whole. Krista Michener, AHP Integrative Health, and any featured guests aren't responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from use of information obtained in this podcast or associated materials. Please consult a healthcare professional for any health-related concerns that you are experiencing.
Welcome to this week's podcast and welcome to Carol Billich. Carol, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. So I met Carol at a MAPS conference, I think 2 years ago, and she is
Right.
a very good little networker. You need to come to our conference. You need to know what we're doing. Come sit with me at dinner, and kind of the rest is history. So I've talked about Intellx a lot on the podcast, but can you first just tell everyone what IntellxDNA does? I know that's a loaded question, but then also tell me what we were just talking about, your background and what led you to this point.
Okay. So IntellxDNA is a genomics testing company. Essentially, we provide the information about the genomics for every person, and we educate doctors so that they can empower their patients with the information they find. It's the blueprint of every patient. And when we provide that content, we pair the genomic results with each patient with the textbook about the genomics about that patient. And then we give you actionable steps to support that patient. You might see, like 6 to 7 potential interventions that you can use based on the SNPs that this person has. And we put it all together in a database, and doctors log in and see this huge compendium of very highly curated data about each and every one of their unique patients.
And you guys are always updating your data too. I mean, that's the other thing that's very cool that I tell patients. This isn't a static document. It's a fantastic investment because your genetics will never change. But what we're learning about them is changing, and they're always giving me more information. And then when you said actionable, you guys don't include any SNPs that aren't actionable, correct?
That's exactly right. We made a decision early on that we weren't going to include any information in our reports that wasn't modifiable, because all it does is make a person feel fearful about something they can't do anything about. But there are so many things you can do that we felt like we could use that information to bring people to a place of personal empowerment, personal agency, and a sense of security that they understand who they are.
And there's really no reason to be scared, because I do get that from some patients. So I don't want to know. I don't want to know. And I always say, whether or not you know it, it's true. But if you know it, then you have the chance to do something about it. It's not like me checking the gene that says Chris is going to be short. I mean, there's nothing to do about it. It's a done deal. And I'm scared of a heart attack. Well, then that's exactly why you want to do this report, because what can you do to mitigate the risk? So share a little bit about how you got to this point, because it's an interesting journey that's not a traditional medical path, but I think really made you equipped to pair with Sharon and make this really work, having a different background.
Sure. So if we go way back, even as a child, I knew that I actually wanted to be a physician, but I come from a family of no means. My family are refugees from North Africa who were transplanted in the United States, not educated, not native speakers, but they were immigrants, and they were hardy people, very resilient, and they were artisans. And I got a lot of good insight from my parents about how to understand how the world works and how different aspects of it or you can see it in systematic approaches. If you look at the world in different ways, you can see the systems that have been created by people who came before us. And if you can figure out the system, you can move into that system and work your way through it however you'd like. And so when it was time for me to go to college, I knew I wasn't going to get to be a physician. So I was trying to figure out, well, what can I do? What do I like? And so being the science nerd that I was all through school, I decided to go down that path and see what I could find. And of course, I took biology, I took physiology, and loved that. But then I thought, how can I think more about my own interaction with different people? And so I took a course in nutrition, and I was just blown away by how ridiculous it was. I mean, I was a college freshman, and I'm sitting in this course and they're teaching on the RDA. And I'm thinking to myself, this is nonsense. This is all propaganda by the grain industry. They're trying to get people to eat more grain and drink more milk, but that's really not what people need or want. And yet we're teaching that that's what's healthy. And so I kind of turned away from that whole process and thought to myself, well, I can't go there. It's just not a path for me. So I started investigating other things, and I went down the route of marketing and advertising, learned a lot, and used a lot of that information over my years. And then I left school for a little while, just trying to figure out, what is it that really I can do, and came back and got a degree in design and architecture. And at the time that I graduated, it was 1986, and the United States was not in a good place and jobs were hard to find. And so I created jobs for myself. I was very successful in creating several businesses for myself over the years. And I worked full time when I was in college and even in high school. So I had a lot of experience in working, and hard work never scared me. Then I ended up going to graduate school, and I got a degree that was a combination of business and essentially international studies. The degree itself is Middle Eastern studies and business, but it was a combination. And I learned a lot about communication, a lot about interacting with people from different cultures, but also from different backgrounds. And then graduated, got married, and had some kids. And I just that hunger for physician just kept gnawing at me. And so I had some pretty severe back problems, ended up not being able to walk, and had to have some surgical procedures, which were successful. But then I had a tremendous amount of pain, and it was just debilitating, and physical therapy wasn't helping me. And I happened upon somebody who was doing craniosacral therapy at the time. And that was kind of new on the scene, even though it had been around since the 70s. It wasn't very popular, and people thought it was kind of woo-woo and, what is all this about? But I went to somebody who was kind of a newbie who was in training, and session one, 50% of the pain went away and never came back. And I went, wow, there is something here. But what was even more kind of enchanting about that experience was all that knowledge that I'd had in anatomy and physiology and biology was available to me as I was being worked on. And I was telling the practitioner all this stuff. And she says, well, how do you know that? And I said, how come you don't know that? And she said, well, I didn't study those things. And I said, well, this is what's happening. And I was telling her about the mechanisms. I told her about the transitions and neurotransmitters and how these things were happening. She's like, you need to do this. And I'm like, I just met you. I don't even know what this stuff is. And she goes, it doesn't matter. You know exactly what it is and you need to do it. So long story short, I did. And I started taking some coursework, and it was like I'd been doing it my whole life. And I'd had other things in my life that made me feel very familiar in that space. And I had a knack in working with people. And so I started my own practice, but I went to doctors and I said, give me your worst patients. Give me everybody who doesn't work. And because I was curious, I still am, I'm a very curious person. And because I understood a lot, I wanted to be able to be truly making a difference. I didn't want to be rubbing somebody. That was not my job. It's a great thing for people who do it well, but that wasn't my interest. I wanted to figure people out and help them become what they wanted. So I went to a bunch of surgeons and I said, you've got a bunch of people who fail, send them to me. You've got nothing to lose. And if it works out, you look great. So they did. And I will never forget the first guy. He was like, all right, I'll give it to you. I'll give you somebody. And he tried to send me somebody who was really not so easy to work with. And the entire session, she just laid on the table and complained to me about all this different stuff. And I said, I totally understand that you haven't been feeling well. Let's just give this a shot. You've got nothing to lose. And so she had massive edema from a surgical intervention that went wrong. And so I mapped her lymphatics and drained her tissue. And she said, well, this was just the biggest waste of time ever. And I said, well, I'm sorry that you feel that way, but I imagine in the next 36 to 42 hours, you're going to feel something pretty significantly different. Just let the doctor know and we'll go from there. So unbeknownst to me, the doctor and she were friends. And she called him as soon as she walked out the door and said, that was just the biggest waste of time. I can't believe you even told me to go see this woman. Less than 8 hours later, she called him back and said, well, maybe I was wrong. She actually helped me, and I feel better than I felt in years, and I feel better than I felt before the surgery.
Wow.
So he called me back that day and didn't ever tell me that story for 5 more years. He just kept sending me people, and I kept getting the kind of outcomes that I got with this woman. And he kept going, what is it you're doing? And I said, I'm listening. And he goes, well, I listen. And I said, what can I say? So it started me off on a great path. And I saw a lot of people who had chronic pain, who had surgical procedures that had gone wrong. And then eventually he started sending me people in advance of the surgery to prep them for the surgery so it would come out better. And I have a long history of working with people in that vein, and great results. And after about 5 years of doing that, I started thinking to myself, there's so much more here that I can do for people. And as it always happens, you get sent what you need. And I got a bunch of people who would come in who were medical mysteries, like the ones that I'd had before, but had been to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And by then my name was kind of, word of mouth was known, mm-hmm. or I was the person that people went to when nothing else was working. And so I started doing personal research in addition to the sessions, and people would come in with loads of documents, boxes of medications and supplements. And for me, it was like, yeah, let's dig in. Yeah. Let's see what we've got here. And I'm somebody who can see those systems like I was talking about, and I can see patterns, and I can see things that are out of order, and I can see things that are in order. And so I found through palpation and through investigation, I found all kinds of things that the doctors hadn't diagnosed. And so I couldn't exactly say, go tell your doctor that you think you might need to be tested for this. And so I'd give them the research that I had. And I said, you go tell the doctors you did this research, and is it possible that maybe these things are working? And so, yeah, that's what happened. And the doctors kept going, well, how did you know this? And how did this happen? And patients would come to me and say, how come you know this, but my doctor doesn't? And some of it has to do with the way I listen, I think. And some of it has to do with the fact that I'm not a physician. So I'm not pre-programmed to think about things in a way that doesn't provide the patient with the personal agency that they need to feel heard.
Well, you mentioned the surgeon saying, I listen too, but he listens with his ears, but his answer is scalpel.
Yeah,
you're a hammer, everything's a nail. And it doesn't mean there aren't great surgeons or we don't appreciate what some of them do.
Exactly.
Maybe not all of them, but what some of them do, but it's not the only intervention. And even when it's a good idea, it's not the whole answer. I mean, that whole recovery piece. So
100%.
That's about when you met Sharon?
It wasn't quite then. It was then that I was actually starting to formulate a business model that I thought would be beneficial if I could find a physician who would work with me. And about 15 to 16 years into my practice, one of my patients had said to me, do you know Dr. Houseman-Co? And I said, well, I know of her and I know lots of her patients, but no, I don't know her specifically. And she said, you guys need to meet and have a conversation. And so the patient made the introduction and we met. And I always tell everybody, I don't know, it's kind of like lightning struck between us. There was something that was really, palpable that was happening between us. And Sharon is somebody who makes decisions very quickly when she sees something that she thinks is worthwhile. And, if it doesn't work, she lets it go. But this
Right.
was something that was unknown to her. And, when she heard about me, she goes, what is this? What is this stuff that you're visceral manipulation? What in the world is that? She even wanted me to change my business cards for her patients. And I said, nope, we're going to stick with what it is that I do and let people see the results and we'll go from there. But at any rate, she wanted to have people come to me. And I said, first, you got to come and understand what it is I do so that you're referring the right people with the right idea of what I can do for them. So she came into my office and that first day, and on my desk was an article about genomics because I'd been studying genomics and reading up on it. And I'd actually been applying a lot of the information I'd had to my folks, my own patient population, with a great amount of success. And she asked me if I knew anything about it. And I said, do you know anything about it? And she said, well, yeah, I just gave a talk on this particular gene. I said, we've got to talk. Let's get together. And the rest is an amazing journey that we've taken together. We ultimately, a few years later, I approached her with the opportunity to join me in practice for joint care. That same business model, that same ideation of joint care with two different approaches was getting us great results, because what had started happening was we were co-treating from our private practices. Do you remember, what was it called? Google Chat or something like that?
Mhm.
And I'd never had that. And she said, let me show you how to install it. So I'd be doing the research for my patients at night and she'd be charting. And all of a sudden I'd get a chat note. And she says, what do you think I can do for this patient who's having, whatever it was? And I'd say, oh, have you ever looked at this supplement? Have you ever looked at this? And she goes, no, I've never heard of that. So I would type in the articles on the published medical research and send it over to her. And she goes, wow, I've never heard of this, but this looks good. Statistically, it looks right. Let's give it a shot. So that opportunity just kept growing and growing and growing. And it was based on those types of interactions that our practice evolved and grew. And lo and behold, people started bringing in their genomics reports. We opened our doors in 2016 and the doors were flooded. I mean, we just had patients coming and coming and coming because we both had our own practices, but people knew we took care of those medical mysteries, people with chronic care. So
And
they
the whole
really wanted,
curriculum. Right.
yeah, they were really interested and we were really interested and excited. But then, as I said, when people started bringing us their reports, we were looking at them and going, there's nothing here. There's nothing we can use. So it
Well,
took us down another journey.
and explain what the pitfalls are, because I've had a few people who have brought me reports from other
Sure.
companies and they're just inadequate in so many ways. But can you just go through what some of the limitations are and how does Intellx distinguish itself?
Sure. So I think it's important to kind of understand, first of all, that every company out there, every genomics company, whether it's a direct to consumer product or a direct to physician product, they make a decision. Again, it's 3 billion pieces of data. You can only look at so much. If you're going to do whole genome sequencing, that's a whole different business. And you're looking at for genes that are pathogenic. And that means they are disease causing. But the things that make people sick in their daily lives is not typically what you see on whole genome sequencing. It is the small changes in the genome. It's those little SNPs, the single nucleotide polymorphisms, independently and then together, that help us to understand a person's ability to be resilient in some ways and not resilient in others. There's genes that are upregulated in a person and downregulated in a person. So we have to understand not only what the gene does, but how it's impacting that individual person. So then what do you do with it?
Right.
You got to figure out what the next step is. But to go back to your original question, some of the big things that we found in the other reports was, one, a lot of those reports are not validated. They're not you don't know what the level of accuracy is in the reporting. So I'm just going to use 23andMe because it's a well-known company. But I always thought when 23andMe came out, wow, they're going to spend all this money to look at a genome. They're going to do it in a way that provides a level of accuracy that would support a person in understanding themselves. But then if I really thought more about it, they're looking at ethnicity, they're looking at heritage, they're not looking at medical information. So it didn't matter if they were less than 50% accurate because it was edutainment, wasn't
Right.
for a particular purpose. And so, you can cut them a break. But then they decided they wanted to do some of the medical pieces and they got caught by the FDA because their accuracy was so poor. And some of the SNPs that they were reporting on could be as low as 30% in accuracy.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean,
Wow.
I don't want somebody making a medical decision about me based on a report that's 30% accurate.
Well, and besides the inaccuracy, just the amount of information that they give you as the consumer or as the provider is so paltry. And I mean, that's really what sets Intellx apart. I would say there are many things that do, but the fact that you only include actionable SNPs and that you give us all of this research to go to, and it gives people so much more hope because MTHFR, that's the big thing, and you'll see people advertise, "I'm an MTHFR specialist doctor," and then I see
Yeah.
people post and say, "Oh, I can't ta detoxify, I have MTHFR." I'm
Yeah.
oh my gosh, like, it's one piece of the puzzle, and
Right.
sometimes someone gets lucky, they do that one test, they switch a few things over, they feel amazingly better, but if they don't, it doesn't mean that they're broken, it just means they don't have all of the data. So how does Intellix decide what to include in your panels?
Okay, so that's a great question. What we do is we look at the particular, I'll call it the health state rather than the disease state, but let's just talk about cardiac health, for instance. So we comb the medical literature to identify the SNPs that have already been validated to be accurate, number one, in the research, that every time you test for it, you're going to get that result. That's one big piece. The next piece is that it has to be modifiable. If we can't modify it, we're not going to put it in there. And then we have to go do the research on the modifiers, the specific things, to find out if what that does works in that particular tissue. So there's differential tissue expression. If I am looking at a supplement, there's some supplements that you get a lot of bang for your buck. They work in heart, they work in brain, they work in liver, they work in kidneys. But some supplements don't give you the impact that you're looking for. So if I have an issue in my brain, I want a supplement that I know is going to cross the blood-brain barrier. Otherwise, what am I taking it for? Right?
No, absolutely, and I think that's one of the many reasons I tell patients all of the time, yes, it's an upfront investment, but you are going to save so much time and money in the long run because you're not going to be guessing. I probably say 5 times a day to patients, guessing is expensive too. And it
Yeah.
really the more I learn, the more I think it is just so invaluable. It's actually a really darn good deal because not
Mhm.
only do we
Thank
get
you.
all of that data and that research, you guys are always updating your research too. Can you tell people a little bit about that process?
Sure. So there's a couple of different pieces. So as the science changes about the SNPs that are in our reports, we update it. We don't wait to figure out, oh, 2 years ago this change was it, and now we're updating the database. As the research breaks through, we have things that alert us. We go identify whether or not that research is valid. We have a lot of processes we do to make sure that it is. That statistical value, that statistical relevance, the clinical evidence, all of those things have to be there in order for it to make it into the platform. And so we do all of that all the time. So even if you bought your report and you were one of our earliest customers, if you bought in 2017, the science is always being updated. So everything you purchased in 2017 is up to date today.
Well, and
Now,
that's why I think it's so valuable for people to understand the benefit of working with your provider on an ongoing basis. I know some people love to just get all of their information and take it and run with it themselves, but it's the providers who have access to that database that we can
Right.
always be looking. And will you talk a little bit about, you just added these neurodegenerative disease SNPs to the medical overview, what that tells people that's different?
Yeah. What we do, okay, so dependent upon which report you have, we may have the ability to put in new SNPs. It depends on when you purchased. I don't want to lead people to believe that it automatically updates with new SNPs because it
Sure.
depends on which sequence you had. So if you're on the most current sequence, all the way back to I think 2021, you'll see some new SNPs in the medical overview. And what we decided was it was really important as practitioners. Now, I'm not a physician, but I do treat patients. And we have to understand that the evolution of the science is also evolving within the patient at the same time. So if we're working with the patient 5 years ago, well, they're coming forward to us now with new information about what they're experiencing, and there's new information in the science that may support them. So we try to put that content into the reports that are available so that we can continue to support them wherever they are. Now, neurodegenerative SNPs, what is that about? We're looking at the whole physiology of the body, neurodegeneration. I mean, everybody understands to some degree oxidation, but they don't understand that the sheath around the nerves is part of that process of degenerative action. And so, if we can support the body in its processes by giving it what it needs, then that degeneration doesn't have to happen at the same rate.
And it's so much more valuable if people can get their minds around the idea that your health is something that's worth investing in upfront. I mean, absolutely, once you're ill, it can be really, really helpful in helping you get better. And I always say putting Humpty Dumpty back together again. But if you have the foresight to make this investment when you're younger and before you have a lot of chronic problems, it's so much easier to prevent than to fix. I mean, it's just
Absolutely.
so
And
rewarding.
I would love it. My personal goal, and Sharon and I share this, is we definitely want to help children because you have the opportunity to support them in the phase of their growth that gives them the opportunity to be really successful in their lives, which changes the dynamics of their families and every person that they interact with. So if I could make it available in such a way that every baby was swabbed and every parent got the playbook for that kid, I mean, wow, what an incredible world we'd have.
That's awesome. I've never really thought of that because I mostly work with teens and adults, but it's so true. I mean, the blood-brain barrier, everything's not closed yet. That neuroplasticity
Yeah.
is still there. I mean, you can make a huge difference quickly. And I've mentioned on the show before, but our son who was adopted from foster care, who had autism and PTSD and all of these things that they told us were just trauma, trauma, trauma. There's nothing you can do about it. It's all trauma. There was a lot of trauma, but when I did the neurodevelopmental report, some of those interventions, it was within days that things changed,
Yeah.
within
It's
literal
amazing.
days. I know. And he had just been written off as hopeless, and it doesn't change his past. It doesn't mean things aren't hard, but it means there's so much more in our power than we were ever led to believe. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So
We spent about 4 years in research and in trial before we launched our report on neurodevelopmental.
mhm.
I sorry, I just get kind of excited about it, and I'm like,
Sure.
we had one particular person who was part of the trial. He'd already had a limited genomics test when we met him. I think he was 14 when we met him. And was non-speaking, he was biting, he was bedwetting, he was I won't say violent, but just not. He was constantly aggravated and agitated. And thankfully, the practitioner who was doing these tests at the time, because we were doing a lot of A/B testing and trying to figure out, is this working? Is this not working? What can we do to better improve the report? So she was taking videos of him at every stage of her care, and so she had a sense of what was happening. in advance of the genomics that we offered, and she had already done some genomics with some limited benefit. He was able to mumble a little bit. He was less agitated, but he was still bedwetting. He was still not able to speak. He was still biting. And so she applied what she learned from the results. And within months, he started speaking. And after that, he was, he was super floppy. He couldn't really hold himself up for very long. And now he's not. He became mainstreamed within a year. When he went to high school, he became the class president. He got a date to the prom. He got a job. He bought a car. He went to college. I mean, for God's sake.
Make me cry. It's amazing.
I mean, I still have goosebumps when I think about this kid. And it's, to be able to support someone in living a life that's empowered, there's nothing better than that. There just isn't.
Well, and I think sometimes there's this temptation to just look at things through a financial lens, but even if all you care about is money, what is the cost of a person's quality of life, of their ability to function and participate in society, plus just knowing who you are. I mean, it really, the more I do it, again, upfront investment, but the payoffs are just guaranteed because everybody's genome is unique. And you even look at family members. I have 5 biological children. 4 of them have done the test. 1 of them does things his way. But with the 4 who have, of course, there's overlap. But then I also see what makes them unique. Why this person struggles in this way versus this one who's high strung versus this one who has no pain. I mean, it's just so remarkable. And we've simplified genes so much to just, I guess, mainstream society. You think, oh, genetics are my mom plus dad plus me. And you hear people say things about siblings. Well, we had the same parents. Why do you struggle with this? And I don't. This is obviously your bad choices. And that's just not true either.
No,
I mean, look at addiction risk. I think that's super affirming when you look at the addiction panel and you think, oh my gosh, this is a hard deck of cards you were dealt, that you had a lot working against you, but there's things we can do to fix it. Yeah, what about, go ahead.
Well, I feel like of all the things that we can do today that are available, genomics is the greatest equalizer of all time. Because it gives you the blueprint. And if you're a savvy clinician, you're never going to look at a patient and say, oh, that's just how you are, get over it, And so many, many, many hundreds of thousands of people, including me, have been shamed by physicians. Oh, this is just in your head. This is not anything that you need to worry about. You just need to get on with your life. Everything is okay. Well, you hear that often enough and you start to diminish yourself and you think you're never going to be able to overcome it. You know there's something wrong, but you don't know how to tell the person who can help you how to help them.
Right.
This is not cool.
And it's so affirming. I mean, I honestly, the other thing I tell patients all the time, all they have is your name and your birth date. They know nothing about you, but you get these reports back and it's like you knew their story because you know their story. You don't know the details, but these are the building blocks that put your life and health together like this. And so many people, just to hear them say, this is so affirming. I've struggled so much. I'm going to tell you one quick story. A lady she has been to treatment out of the country, extremely frail, just was on a very limited number of foods, is the most diligent, hardworking patient that I have. And we found out, now you're going to tell me the name of the gene because I'm blanking, but where she needs the tetrahydrobiopterin, where her body doesn't make that enzyme. So she's got 2 copies of that SNP. So when you have that, you don't have the enzymes to adequately make serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, nitric oxide, all of these so all these critical processes. And just by doing that, and she needs leucovorin too, she is making gains that she has been searching for decades.
I mean, that phenomenal?
It's amazing. And if people would spend the money up front too, how much money could you save? I mean, how much money? I mean, she didn't know me and I didn't know the test back then, that's fine, but some people, I can't get to do it until the very last minute when they've done everything else, and I think, "But you
Sure.
wouldn't have to do everything else." Not that all your problems will be solved, but you'll know which paths are worth pursuing.
Exactly. I mean, you say it's not just about the saving of the money, which can be really big because over the lifetime of an individual, they'll spend hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. They just won't think about it in that way because it's done over a lifetime.
Mhm.
But if you look at it from the, beginning and then the trajectory of that person, you really are saving them tons and tons of money. But importantly, you're giving them their life. You're giving them a life that is joyous and opportunistic in ways that they might not ever have had. I mean,
And
it's unbelievable.
it's your personal, like, Bible forever, it's your
Yeah.
roadmap because we've got just with my family, and we've had all these stupid tick-borne infections, and so there's a lot of chronic health stuff here, but every time somebody hits a bump, I just say, "Okay, I'm going back to the report. What else can I find?" Instead of
Mhm.
feeling hopeless like we used to for years and think, "Alright, where else do I look? What is missing?" That's always my first step back and say, okay, through the lens of what's happening right now, what might I have missed and what can I change or alter that I haven't?
Absolutely. And then also, I'm sure after having used it, you can think about a patient who you haven't yet gotten the results on, but look at them and start thinking about how you're going to treat them empirically. It's not exactly phenotype, but you get a sense of how people might be, and then
Exactly.
the report validates it for you. I mean, it's an amazing roadmap.
It is. And one of the things at this last conference that I had never thought of before, but one of the speakers had mentioned, you really, really need to pay attention to how rare this is in the population because the more rare it is, the less adaptation there
Right.
has been. So, can you just explain a little about the statistics you throw forth in each of the steps as far as odds ratio, prevalence, those sorts of numbers?
Yeah. So if something is occurring in 40% of the population, then more than likely there is some sort of adaptation that's already happened, not only from a physical standpoint, the actual body, but also from a treatment perspective. There's already a lot of information because it's so prevalent in humanity. But when you're dealing with people who have chronic issues, you're looking for the things that are in 20% or less. So that particular number, we made that decision because so in our practice, we had an opportunity to work with more than 1,000 patients, and we watched as they took on the information and the treatment and what occurred as a result. So we modified as we went back and forth, just like you do clinical trials, but we didn't have, a population that we weren't treating. We had a population that we were treating. And as we watched it, it was obvious. It became clearer and clearer to us. Look, we've got to look deeper. We have to look further. But at the same time, we have to look at a larger number of SNPs. And why is that? Because if I'm only looking at 35 SNPs, what's the chance of you having all 35 and that's going to give me enough direction to support you where you live? It's
Right,
not, which is
right.
why we look at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of SNPs so that we can evaluate, well, where are you in this frame? I like to think about the pixels on a picture. If I don't have a good set of pixels, what am I really looking at? I'm not looking at anything,
Yeah.
and I certainly can't treat from that. So we have to have enough pixels so that the picture is clear.
That's a great analogy. That really is. Just kind of that whole idea of looking just at MTHFR, what does that really tell you about someone? If that's one pixel, it it might be an important one, but you're missing a lot. Would
Yeah.
would you also mention, because it's newer and I don't have a lot of experience with it, the new Her Mind and Body Women's Health panel, what that envelops that is new and exciting?
Yeah. So that report, what evolved out of the reports that we have. So as you might imagine, Sharon and I work and treat lots of people, and we never imagined that we would be working with women who would be having difficulty getting pregnant, but it's just a natural course of, treatment with people. When you treat hundreds and hundreds of people, you see people who have these issues. Well, it became obvious when so many of the people who were having difficulty getting pregnant became pregnant after they started using the treatments for genomics. And one of the first things we learned was about clotting. And we understood if you've got factor 5 or factor 2, that's going to increase your, pregnancy loss risk. And so we started paying more attention to that. And then there were other SNPs that we started paying more attention to. And over time, we started looking at PCOS. We started looking at infertility as a whole. We started looking at the specifics of young women's health. Because if you're postmenopausal, you're not necessarily dealing with all of these things anymore. But yes, you still have the same SNPs, but because you're beyond that, you're not symptomatic in the same way. But over time, with hundreds of reports and hundreds of patients who suddenly are feeling better from that perspective, from their female health, we realized we had something that we had to put together. And so that's how that report evolved.
And honestly, again, going back to value, the cost of this test is this big compared to the cost of IVF and
Right.
the heartbreak and the miscarriages and pregnancy loss, like all of these things. And no matter what happens, it's going to benefit you and your health and quality of life and your future. And I think just some people, and there are different patient populations, but some people are so used to, like you said, making all of these cumulative investments that they just have a
Mhm.
hard time making one bigger investment, but in
Sure.
reality, what it gives you is amazing, and honestly, like I said, I think the more I learned that your test is a great value too, because if I order like factor 5 Leiden or factor 2 just from a hospital lab and somebody
Right.
has no insurance or they have a really high deductible, they're gonna pay up to $1,000 for one gene. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
and
That's
that's
right.
insane, and instead
That's
we
right.
get this big picture that tells us so many different things, and say you pay for that one gene and you just find out you don't have it, then you don't really know any more than you did versus this opportunity to see how your whole body's working
And then
together
what you can do with it.
and what you can do with it, and it's
Right.
just I appreciate you so much and what you do. We're about out of time, but will you tell the story of why you're called IntellxDNA? Because I really like it.
Sure. So, when we started the company, we actually called it something else. We called it in-depth DNA because we were looking in depth at DNA and coming up with these solutions, I'll call them. And we loved that name. But at the same time that we registered for our trademark, another company 1 week before us had registered for their trademark. And so they weren't in the books. We couldn't tell that it had already been taken and they were already calling themselves in-depth genomics. And so we got the notification after we were about to launch, 2 weeks before we were going to launch our whole company at a conference. And we had all the brochures and we had the software and we had all this stuff. And we were like, oh my God, what are we going to do? You know? And so, I mean, we didn't know what to do. We really couldn't think about exactly how we were going to accomplish all that needed to be accomplished in a 2 week time frame. And we had to make a decision that day. And it also happened to be one of my kids' birthdays when we got that notification, and we were going to go out for dinner. And I said, let's all go out. Let's just all go out and we're going to brainstorm and come up with some names for our company. And I will not deny that I did have margarita on board. And, around 5:30, 6 o'clock with the margarita on board, I get a little slap happy and goofy. And I was thinking about those books that I can't remember. They're yellow and it's like the
For
dumb
dummies.
person,
Yeah,
dumb, books
yeah.
for dummies. And so I said to Sharon, how about two dumb chicks DNA? And she's like, no. Sharon does not like the dumb
Right,
idea. She just
right.
does not like that. But the chicks, that kind of stuck. And we started thinking about two X's. And it kind of was like, well, okay, well, what about smart? What is smart chicks? Oh no, it's an intelligent approach. It's an intelligent approach to DNA, and we're two chicks. So IntellxxDNA.
I
And
love
then
it.
we got a thing from Intel that told us that we couldn't use Intel because they had trademarked that word. I'm like, it's a word. But they said no. So we had to smush it all together. It couldn't be IntellxDNA. It had to be IntellxDNA. And so we put it all together, threw it onto the database, threw it onto some new marketing material, and we launched. And that's the story.
I love it. I love it. Go
Yeah, we
X
still laugh about
chromosomes.
it.
Yeah, I think it's awesome. Well, and just so people know too, I mean, we've kind of alluded to it. Not only do you get value in that report, it's just the ongoing support. It's on the ongoing support, not only on the research end and what's available to us, but the conferences, everything that you do that helps us still up the care that we give and increase what we have to offer to people. I really think in an ideal world, everybody would do this, and it gives so much hope for healing. So I thank you for grabbing me at that conference and
All
for
right.
everything that you guys do to support providers. It's amazing.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, you're making my heart smile right now because this is not while it is a labor of love for sure,
Mhm.
it's not easy. It is the hardest thing that we've ever done, and it is a significant challenge to us on a daily basis. But when we get to work with practitioners like you, and you join our community of practitioners. I mean, you've been to the conferences. For us, it really matters that we're bringing people together in a style of community. We don't want it to seem as though it's just we're pounding you with information. We want you to be a part of this community that wants to make a difference in the world because that's what our goal is. We want to make a difference.
Well, and you manage to balance scientific rigor that's not draped in hubris because I think that's what some conferences and organizations they're really big on themselves and you can have confidence in what you're doing and confidence in the science but still be a community, and be welcoming and not and I appreciate it too because I've been to other conferences where you can tell as a nurse practitioner instead of a doctor you're a second class citizen, and
I hate
you
that.
guys aren't that way at all. I mean, partly
Yeah,
because of your beginnings, because you came at it from a different angle and you're just
right.
going, hey, we want anyone who can help people be well, and we're here to give you the tools to do it. So thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. And I will just give you one piece of information. Some people ask us, why don't we sell directly to the consumers? And we made a conscious decision from the first day that the kind of content we wanted to provide had to be useful. And if we gave it to the biohacker or the individual who doesn't understand the impact that this information has, we're essentially arming and then harming patients.
Right.
And our first goal, do no harm. We're not
Right.
going to harm people. And where does medical information belong? It belongs in the hands of those people who've studied it and who practice it and who want to continue learning and applying.
Right. No, I appreciate that. I actually have someone just this week, we were talking about the test. She wanted to do it, but she's one of those she's scared. And I said, well, I have the option. And I prefer it this way for some people to only give you little bits of information at a
Yeah.
time. I'm not going to withhold things. I mean, you paid for the test. If somebody just wants it, I'll go through it. But in those situations, I can just give her what's digestible. I can go through it and say, yes, there are hundreds of genes here, but what are the top 2 things that we can do right now to get you started? And let's just give you a little bits at a time so you're not overwhelmed, and I can help you go through that process of sifting out what's the most relevant thing for you right now to take the fear away and instead build confidence, which is what it ultimately
Right.
should be doing.
Right. And I think also exactly like what you're saying, if you are sharing the report with them in this way, not only does it validate them, they get to see it. They get to
Right.
see this is me. But if it's just you telling them that,
Mhm.
it's them having to put their faith in you, somebody who they don't know. And then they're going, well, how do I know this is going to work? But if they
Right.
see it right
Right.
there, they can go, and they do, they start crying,
Right.
you know, I can't believe I knew that about myself, but I
Right.
didn't know how to express it. And now here it is.
This explains the last 20, 30 years of my
Exactly.
life. And I think hats off too, because you and Sharon are both, neither of you are old, but you're at the age where you could be say, hey, life's gonna get a little easier for now. We're gonna
Yeah.
take a break, but you're instead investing those decades of experience and knowledge into building something really great. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And thank you for, supporting us and helping your patients understand how they can benefit from using genomics.
Thanks. Thanks for coming on. And remember, everyone, you can go to IntellxX's website, which is IntellxxDNA.com, to learn more. Remember to have hope because you were made to be whole.
Have a podcast question or suggestion? Text or call us on the podcast info line at 330-439-0686. Thank you for spending time with me today. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to be notified when new episodes release. And remember, you were made to be whole.